Hey guys, welcome back. It's Lincoln Wright here, and I'd like to share with you another way that I make the Studio Ma.K models. I'm going to use these two products and show you two quick tips on how to make an excellent texture. Okay, let's go. The kit I'm going to use for this is a polar bear from the Maschinen Krieger property, and you can see an unboxing for it here, and a build tips video in the comments below. These Maschinen Krieger kits, Ma.K, they benefit from some additional texture. It's just part of the universe. They're a rough and ready kind of armored unit, and the large scale of the models, 1/120th scale, lends itself to adding some additional visual and almost visceral detail to the models. Step 1 is simply to use a extra thin cement. Any of the brands work. I happen to be using the Gunze one here, Mr. Cement, but I've also used Tamiya for this purpose. You can also use some of the other, the chemical breakdowns that people know about it, but that's getting quite advanced. For this, I just suggest that you get one of the brands that does an extra thin cement, because we want it to evaporate quickly. That's what makes it easy to work with. Now, for you old timers watching this, you'll know, Stinky Link, I did not invent this technique whatsoever. I think I may have brought it to Maschinen Krieger, I don't know, but I did borrow this technique from the old school armor modelers, because I know this is how some people would add armor texture to armored tanks and what have you. Some of them would do the extra thin cement and then stipple it with a brush. You could do that here. In this two-step process that I'm going to show you, however, I use a slightly different version. And this is what I've developed personally myself for the Maschinen Krieger property, and I did this on many of the studio finished kits. This should go without saying, before you start liberally dousing your plastic models with extra thin cement, make sure you have adequate ventilation, plenty of fresh air, because you're not supposed to be breathing these fumes, okay? Now, while I've been yapping, you can see I pulled out a bunch of tools. I've got a file here in my hands. I tend to stick to a surface at a time. Much like painting, I want the glue to be controllable. I don't want the glue to run all over the place. Then you end up fingerprinting or damaging your model. So I'll tend to stick with a flatter surface at one particular time. Here I've gone with that front chest plate, and giving it 1 to 2 coats of the extra thin cement, giving it a few moments for it to work its magic and melt the plastic a little bit, and then I physically damage it with these harder tools. Now, I've got a bunch of different files here. It's not particularly important, there's no magic to this, but having different shapes will, lo and behold, give you different effects. It really is that simple. Now, there's not a lot of right or wrong to do here. You can see here, if I've damaged it a little bit too far, you can then use your glue again to remelt some of the plastic to have it sit down a little bit better. But a word to the wise, use restraint. Don't go too hard on this. There's many of these techniques that instead of you controlling them, when I see people use them for the first time, the techniques end up controlling that poor person. And you can see they've gotten really excited about it and they've gone too far. I've gone pretty heavy this time. I see a couple of seconds there in between. Douse, douse, douse. Now, even just wafting the plastic brush on there adds a little bit of texture to the plastic, especially the second time. You can see I try to give it a nice even coat. It's reasonably self-leveling, but it can get out of control, so just be careful. A few seconds there, talk, talk, talk. And then I pull out the tools and I'll start to work into the plastic. Now, give it some logical thought. Don't just mess it up. I mean, I tried to go for places that, I'm very familiar with this model, so it's pretty easy for me, but I go with places that look like obvious areas that this battle suit would attract damage through operational use. For something like this, it has a lot of organic curves and bulges. I'll try to go for the central areas and give it a bit of a ding. But then work some out towards the edges as well. And what happens is, then working this together with a fully weathered paint regimen will produce a very realistic result and it'll give us some visceral 3D details to our model. Coming in close, you can see the plastic does get quite roughed up. I mean, that's what we want the texture. But in moving some of the plastic around, you'll get some extra stuff displaced. One of the things I do is I come in afterwards with a hobby knife like this. Sorry, it's a little bit shaky. It's actually quite hard to hold for the camera and look around it whilst getting this right. But I'll come in and I'll shave off, cut off, trim off some of the extra plastic that's been displaced. You could leave, like I'll leave some of it on there, and like I showed before, you can melt some of it back down. But generally speaking, I'll come in, I'll trim off some of the bigger ones because I definitely want them to be innies more than outies. Once you've got it down to the level you like, you can clean it back up again a little bit, just melt it down. Sometimes it can bother the scale effect a little bit, having the plastic look a little bit too raw. So I'll often seal it back down with a bit more extra thin cement. Now the second step I'd like to show you with this method is, after finishing up with the extra thin cement, I'm going to use a primer and surfacer all in one product. I'm sure that one's going to be popular in the pop group now, Surfancer EVO by Gaia Notes by Uncle Stinky Link. This product does airbrush as well. It's quite comparative to, say, a Surfacer 500 by GSI Krios. But this one, I'm going to apply it by hand brush. This is just kind of this is part of the build and paint tips video, I guess. I just didn't have it ready yet, but I wanted to show you. See that little, that's where the kit goes together there. Most of the time, these bamboo skewers, they fit exactly in there. So I've painted, like this is number 20 I've mentioned in my other videos. I just wanted to give you guys a little tip. I generally paint these half and half like that. I generally keep the lower body and the upper body separate. Not for any real reasons, just because it's really easy. And I thought you might appreciate the tip. Here I'm using Gaia Notes T07 Moderate Thinner in a custom-made shaker cup bottle that I made from the self-leveling thinner from Mr. Color. Both work. I just prefer the taste of the. I'm kidding. Don't drink it. Don't drink it. I just prefer the Gaia Notes one. It does smell less. Using this stuff for the first time, you've really got to get yourself one of these paint stirrers. I mean, it's hard duty doing it any other way. The reason these things are really good for surfaces is that they have a lot of this talc-like product, and it accumulates in the bottom. You've really got to mix them up thoroughly to get them to work the way they're designed to. If you don't do it properly, you'll just kind of be using black paint at the top, and then you'll have way too much of the sediment at the bottom, and you'll never kind of like figure out how it works properly. Now, the paint dish I showed initially, I was babbling too much and I couldn't share with you. That has some, I believe it's GSI Krios propeller color from a previous build, maybe from the Sea-Peak. The reason I'm showing that is these paints are all quite compatible. Lacquers generally mix with lacquers, particularly the Mr. Color and the Gaia Notes range. I'm adding it here for two reasons. Number one, I didn't want to start a new dish. You don't need a new dish for every single color you do. These colors are very compatible. Many a time I've actually mixed propeller color and black for a primer color because it's black red is just it's a fantastic, it's borrowed from the art world. I think Rembrandt often painted off a black red background. Mixing them together like this, it will just produce a little variety. Over the years, I've had to make a lot of same kits, if that makes sense. So, for example, this one I've mentioned how many times now? I've mentioned more times than I've made kits. So I've made 20 of these things. You just kind of want a little bit of individuality with them. So, adding this black to the dark red there, it will make it very unique and a one-off color. So, even though this one is kind of a copy of a paint scheme I did back in 2008, it will look different. Even if I try to make it look exactly the same, it will end up looking different just by virtue of adding those very, very small steps. And I feel arty and cool because as I mix down into the palette there, some of the red comes up and it produces different effects over the model. And I just really like that. That keeps little nerdy Link happy. And that was part of the thing. When you're working on these professionally and making multiples of the same kit, finding little ways of happiness in them was kind of important too, but I thought I could pass them on. If you guys enjoy those little things too, it just makes the whole process fun, doesn't it? I wanted to mention, this is a pretty old stanky brush. that works really well for this part of the process. You can see I'm mostly pointing it on. Now, instead of going with the flat, I'll generally go with the flat or the point to produce a softer finish. Here I'm more stabbing it in because with the talc type products that I mentioned before that are built into this paint, it will help produce a randomized texturized, is that even a legit combination of words? It will produce a randomized texture over the face of the model, blending in with the physical damage we've done underneath, as well as sealing it for further paint steps. I mean, there's just so many cool things about this process that I really had to do a separate video to show you. The other video, the texture one, giving the model the finger with Tamiya Basic Putty, that's done super well. I think it's had over like 10,000 views, but I saw friends using it on smaller models and it doesn't work. So I wanted to give you another way. So generally speaking, I'll use this for the smaller Maschinen Krieger kits like this, so the 120 scale suits. I think it works really well. Now, whilst I'm watching this back, I do realize, I'll admit, I think my videos are sometimes a little bit misleading because, I mean, look at that massive brush and I'm getting the edges and details there. So, you know, in all honesty, I think you should probably use a couple of sizes of brushes for this. I have unusual control, especially I'm not supported here. Both of my hands are floating and I'm way back on the brushes on both of them. So, and I'm not always not shaky, I'm not always super stable, so because I've had a couple of coffees and that sometimes when I'm working, but I think I can judge my shakes well enough. You know, it's like shooting in between breathing. Once you get very good at taking long shots, you don't have to always be holding your breath to be on target. That's probably completely unrelated and it may not make sense unless you're a long shooter as well. Anyway, so do use a couple of sizes of brushes. Once it gets a little bit awkward, the reason I keep that on its feet, look at that, it stands up on its feet. So it's easy, right? And then I use this guy in between whilst the legs are drying. Slather, you can see, boy, I doused this one, didn't I? Looking back, that's horrific even to me, and I did it. But this is the primer coat and the texture. You do want it on pretty thick. I'm not thinning it. This bottle, the jar of paint is pretty new, so I'm putting it on quite thick. And you'll see it settles down and gives it a really good texture. Don't worry, this is a professional at work. I think I know what I'm doing. Well, actually no, the results turned out really well. So I've seen this through to the end, don't worry. It did work out, but you do want this. It's sealing and it's sticking to the plastic really well. But I just move it around. I have had a lot of practice at not fingerprinting stuff, but do be careful where you touch it. But the good thing is you could sandpaper it off if you did accidentally do it. And by the time I get around all of these easy, low-hanging fruit, easy to spot places and covering them with this, the legs will be dry. I can hold the parts that I've already done and move on and finish that off. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you've come to the patron-only part of the show. And here you will see I expertly do one spill. That's one metric stinky spill of thinner. And the reason I can only show this to Patreon, because check it out, that's an AK interactive brush. When I was using it though, I did have a bit of a giggle. But the funny thing is, it was MIG that gave me these AK brushes, and now I'm not allowed to use them because of Spanish paint wars. Anyways, I do have a reason for using that particular brush. It's a really good length and just the right amount of kind of damagedness. It's not new, but it's pointy enough to get into the details, and that's one thing that I wanted to share with you guys away from the public one, is that I do go back. I don't do this just in one hit. The texturizing part of this, it's a multiple layer process. I don't do like millions of layers, but I'll do it in say 2 or 3 separate stints just to get it right, because there'll be a couple of places that you just miss, some places where it's wrong, or you've laid it on too thick. And I've had a little bit of feedback. A couple of our patrons have shown me where they put on paint too thick. And here's one of the ways I do it. When I joked about the metric spill, I did purposely put quite a bit of thinner in there. And the reason for that is I'll repaint on some areas to reactivate it and smooth it out by painting on more. I know that's a little bit counterintuitive, but That is one of the joys of lacquers, is that you can add more to fix some mistakes. Sometimes you will have to remove it, but yeah, you can add more. And I wanted to show you some of this brushwork in here. See, I'm using the dragging the brush across in vectors there. That's adding both texture and smoothing out some of the bumps that I've added in. Now I'm sorry, the sheen on this paint, it's actually quite matte, so it's hard to see the surface very well in video footage, but here we go. This is going to be a prominent part of the finished model, so giving it a good texture there and working, say, horizontal vectors across the run of the helmet is a good way to develop a good heaviness to the armor. And you'll see what I mean when it's finished. The armor will have a very good apparent weight and heaviness. And part of that is due to a physical thickness of paint on the model. I know it's often talked about as being wrong, but no. Sometimes thick paint done well works nicely. Okay, thanks guys. This show was brought to you by the awesome people at Hobbyco. Make sure you support local hobby shops. Support local. They bring all this really cool Japan stuff into Australia, especially Gunpla. Plus, I'm supported by an awesome team of patrons who dig deep out of their own pockets to bring you this content. Please join the team. See us here. Thanks guys. See you soon. Bye. Subscribe. Hey. Okay, bye.